The Nation of Yahweh explained. Hey peeps, we as African American people have been on a constant quest to find our true identity. Many African American leaders and representatives of the past have laid a foundation as to who we as Black people believe ourselves to be. Today, I would like to shed some light on the Nation of Yahweh. The social climate of America leading up to the founding of the Nation of Yahweh. Before we get to the founding of the nation, let's briefly take a peek of the historical context of Blacks in America. The roots of African American ancestry are often a mystery prior to the North Atlantic slave trade. Family trees are nearly untraceable after 5 or 6 generations, a constant reminder that 150 years ago, Black people weren't considered people. Genealogists refer to this as the brick wall, an obstruction in African American lineage that dates to 1870, when the federal census began recording African descendants. 250 years after, they were first hauled and changed to what would become the United States. Over the last 100 years in America, there have been many Black leaders, cultural movements that strove to find their identity and ultimately freedom. From Garveyism to the Nation of Islam, the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Panther Party, and so many more have made extensive efforts to nationalize, restore hope and pride to the Black man, and answer the critical question of, who are we? Not to forget that this was all done while Black people were targeted by policies such as the war on drugs enacted by President Richard Nixon. And let's just read what John Ehrlichman, who served as the White House counsel and assistant to the President for Domestic Affairs under President Richard Nixon, has recently stated about why the war on drugs was created. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Blacks. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin and then criminalizing them both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night in the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did, Ehrlichman said. Needless to say, this was a rather tumultuous time for African Americans, and it was reaching a climax. Let's dive into one particular cultural movement today called the Nation of Yahweh. Amidst this turbulent social climate, Yahweh Ben Yahweh came to Miami at a time in which it was suffering more than it ever had. Violent crimes had risen by over 40%, and Yahweh Ben Yahweh still managed to establish something extraordinary. Founding of the nation. First off, who is Yahweh Ben Yahweh? Yahweh Ben Yahweh was born October 27, 1935, in Kingfisher, Oklahoma. He received a bachelor's degree from Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma, a master's degree in economics from Atlanta University, Atlanta, Georgia, and attended Oklahoma University School of Law. Yahweh Ben Yahweh was a tactical instructor while serving the United States of America in the Air Force. His tours of duty were done in California and Texas. Yahweh Ben Yahweh came to Miami, Florida alone in 1979 to become the spiritual leader and founder of the Nation of Yahweh. Although he took a vow of poverty that same year, within 12 years, he guided the nation and those who followed his teachings and principles to amass an economic empire in Miami and throughout the United States worth over $250 million. Under his direction, the Nation of Yahweh had grown to encompass disciples, followers, and supporters in over 1,300 cities within the United States and 16 foreign countries, such as Ghana, Nigeria, Great Britain, Canada, and the Caribbean. The University of Yahweh, for which he established the curriculum and for which he had received great acclaim in educational excellence, he had locations in both Miami, Florida, and Atlanta, Georgia. Yahweh Ben Yahweh brought about changes in the lives of individuals by causing them to take a different approach to life. This approach is based on the scripture which reads, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Yahweh Ben Yahweh gave so much to society. However, that which he gave couldn't be measured in terms of monetary wealth. Yahweh Ben Yahweh gave the world a method in which to succeed in life, politically, economically, educationally, socially, and spiritually. The Nation of Yahweh beliefs and teachings. The Nation of Yahweh believes in the God of the Bible, whose personal name is Yud-He-Wav-He, translated into all other languages as Yahweh, and is seen or known as the Father of all men. The Nation of Yahweh uses the Holy Bible as the rule and guide for their faith and practices the biblical law as found in the Torah. Yahweh ben Yahweh teaches his disciples and followers to practice charity and benevolence, to protect chastity, to respect the ties of blood and friendship, to adopt the principles and revere the laws of Yahweh, to assist the feeble, guide and open the eyes of the blind, heal the ears of the deaf, raise up the oppressed and downtrodden, shelter the widow and the orphan, support the government of Yahweh, inculcate morality, promote learning, love moral men, fear Yahweh, implore his mercy, work for happiness, and be industrious. Yahweh ben Yahweh taught the importance of community and of building as a family, and displayed how the Black community can overcome the obstacles placed before them if they unite as one nation. Many from various nationalities, religions, or creeds have shown gratitude for his teachings. The height of the nation. After 7 years, Yahweh ben Yahweh had guided the nation to a level of prominence previously unseen within the Black community. Yahweh ben Yahweh's business and charity efforts earned him respect in the community. The Miami mayor, Xavier Suarez, declared Yahweh ben Yahweh Day on October 7, 1990, a month before Yahweh's indictment. The Nation of Yahweh owned and ran many different key establishments in the community, such as restaurants, grocery stores, body shops, hotels, fashion boutiques, Yahweh universities. The Nation of Yahweh not only owned and ran these institutions, but had originally come to buildings and people which were previously dilapidated and poverty-stricken. However, in a matter of months, the Nation of Yahweh would have them operating and functioning as upstanding businesses and homes. Yahweh ben Yahweh led the development of properties. Some were used as hotels and motels, while others as rental properties. Yahweh ben Yahweh made the facilities open to the entire public at competitive rates. The Nation of Yahweh ran the University of Yahweh based on a curriculum they developed themselves, in which students learned management, vocational training, music theory, horticulture, and landscaping. The Nation of Yahweh made the broken down streets of Miami, Florida unrecognizable in a good way. By 1987, the Nation of Yahweh had acquired many properties spread all across the state. They had over 20 different grocery stores spanning nationwide. There were stores in Missouri, New York, Florida, Georgia, and Boston, Massachusetts. They had jewelry stores, beauty and barber salons, and fashion boutiques. There were roofing companies and bus lines, upholstery businesses, limousine services, welding services, and telecommunication services. All of these businesses paid taxes and were created without the use of loans. The Nation of Yahweh was contributing to the country in a massive way. What had been some of the most dangerous and impoverished areas in the state a few years prior were giving way to some of the most affluent neighborhoods in Miami. The attack on the nation. Unfortunately, in 1990, the FBI carried out an illegal raid against all Yahweh properties nationwide, in which doors were forcefully broken down, innocent men, women, and children were handcuffed, and members were arrested en masse, all without presenting a single search warrant or arrest warrant. These were responsible citizens with jobs and families. Defenseless women and children were taken into the streets with guns pointed to their heads, made to lie down in the street with their faces to the ground and their hands cuffed behind their backs. The women and female children were searched thoroughly by agents out in the open. Their holy headdresses were then removed in public. These same agents carried automatic weapons and hand grenades. Yet not a single weapon was found in the sanctuary or on any Yahweh members. Yahweh buses were coming to daily morning prayer services. The drivers were asked to pull over, and all males aboard the bus were arrested and taken into custody, again without a warrant or probable cause. They then arrested Yahweh ben Yahweh, accusing him of the multiple murders carried out by a man named Robert Rozier. This man, who was once known as Lying Bob Rozier in college, he admitted to being the suspect in these murders, and in exchange for a 22-year sentence for 4 murders, he promised the FBI that he could bring in Yahweh ben Yahweh, claiming that Yahweh ben Yahweh ordered him to carry them out. No other evidence was offered other than the lying Bob Rozier's testimony, and this led to the jurors in the civil court to find Yahweh ben Yahweh not guilty. Regardless of the lack of any evidence and the court ruling Yahweh ben Yahweh innocent, the FBI was vehemently pursuing the nation. So, what did they do? They pulled out one of the most confusing legal jargons you can find in the U.S., known as the RICO Act. That's short for Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations. Yes, you might be asking yourself what that even means. Let's take a quick look at what RICO really means. RICO was enacted in 1970 by the United States Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs to combat the growing infiltration of secretive Italian mafia networks involved in corruption across American cities and directed by kingpins. Jurors in the federal racketeering and murder conspiracy trial of self-proclaimed son of God Yahweh ben Yahweh and 15 of his disciples said Monday they were deadlocked in their deliberations. After working for more than 20 hours over 3 days, jurors sent U.S. District Judge Norman Roediger Jr. a note indicating they were unable to reach a verdict on either the conspiracy count or the racketeering charge against Yahweh and the co-defendants. Some of the jury feels that the government did not prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt as to any act listed in the indictment on counts 1 or 2. Therefore, we are stuck, the note said. After meeting with defense lawyers, Roediger told the jury to continue its deliberations and attempt to reach agreement on all counts against all defendants. But just a few minutes after Roediger sent the written instruction to the jury, the forewoman sent yet another note asking the judge, "May I speak to you orally? It's urgent." Roediger sent word to the juror to put her communication in writing. A note sent earlier, Monday, also indicated the panel was having difficulty reaching a verdict. "Your Honor, in order to deliberate effectively, we cannot come to terms with the fact that there was a conspiracy on the part of the defendants charged in this indictment." A note sent earlier Monday said, "We are hopelessly hung on whether these defendants were involved in a conspiracy as charged in the indictment. We've reviewed the instructions thoroughly. Please advise." Defense lawyer Stephen Kastner said, "The jury's action was not surprising because of the questionable credibility of prosecution witnesses. Much of the government's case was based on the testimony of the former member Robert Rozier, who confessed to killing 7 people and cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a prison sentence of 22 years for 4 murder convictions. The witness they presented were not very credible at all. The main government witness were caught in lie after lie after lie, committing perjury in front of the grand jury and committing perjury in sworn statements," Kastner said. "That's got to take its toll." Much research today argues that the act has derailed from its intended purpose and has inherent flaws in its language. Although the state found him not guilty, the RICO Act was used to punish Yahweh ben Yahweh due to being the leader of the Nation of Yahweh, and that the actual convicted suspect, Robert Rozier, claimed to have believed in the teachings of the Nation of Yahweh. Now let's pause and think this through. Let's say a man that was part of the Christian community goes out and commits a series of murders. Would the federal court punish the Pope? Would the priest of the church the man attended be sentenced because he taught the teachings that the man claims to have believed? One article states a strong conclusion about the RICO that led to the verdict against Yahweh ben Yahweh. It states, RICO has enabled federal prosecutors in effect to circumvent the constitutional separation of powers between the national and the state governments. Since RICO's passage, the once clear jurisdictional boundaries between state and federal law enforcement have been erased as more and more individuals find themselves in federal dock with almost no chance of acquittal. Even more, they prohibited Yahweh ben Yahweh from teaching when he would be released, while we have a recent example of a minister that was found guilty of embezzlement. However, the minister had full access to continue teaching his congregation. Yahweh ben Yahweh's religious rights and human rights had been continuously violated and totally ignored. The First Amendment guarantees the right to freedom in religion, meaning all American citizens are free to worship God as they please. This includes the right to a kosher diet as prescribed by Levitical law, according to the second edition of Florida jurisprudence. The lack of reasonable opportunities to exercise religious freedom constitutes a violation of the First Amendment, including the disallowance of any special diet for persons whose religion imposes dietary restrictions. However, in light of all of this, Yahweh ben Yahweh was still not given the kosher diet he was prescribed. According to a statement by Yahweh ben Yahweh, Officials admit that they have kosher meals for all white Jews, yet I am absolutely denied the same privilege. I have gone through the due process by completing the necessary Koput form. I was then promised kosher meals, and officials said my request had been approved. Yet, I was denied these kosher meals. Prison officials have attempted to deceive me by putting K on my takeout plate. But when compared to the unkosher meals of the other inmates, my meals are identical to theirs. I have been given plates after pork has been taken off of them. If it were not for some inmates occasionally giving me an apple, lettuce, and tomato salad, and oranges, I would soon be hospitalized for malnutrition and starvation. Only my evening meals are classified as kosher, and even those are served with meat. I am a kosher vegetarian. According to 28 CFR Chapter 5, 540.51, the warden may allow a visitor to leave money with a designated staff member for deposit in the inmate's commissary account. However, when Yahweh Ben Yahweh's attorney attempted to leave money for him in his commissary account, his attorney was told that the money order had to be mailed in. Again, this is totally inconsistent with federal regulations. In 28 CPR 540.71a, it states that an inmate may receive other soft cover material, for example, paperback books, newspaper clippings, or magazines, from any source. Yet Bibles, King James Version, and other paperback books sent to Yahweh Ben Yahweh and his followers were rejected and returned. Judge Aronovitz also ruled to allow all requesting inmate members of the class the opportunity to wear religious headdresses during formal worship service, which coincides with 28 CFR Chapter 5, 548.12f, where it states that an inmate ordinarily shall be allowed to wear or use personal religious items during devotional service. Upon request of the inmate, the warden may allow an inmate to wear or use personal religious items within the institution. However, Yahweh Ben Yahweh and his followers were not afforded the opportunity to wear their religious attire. Regulations 551.118c goes on to state that an inmate may supply his own clothing during court appearances. Page 23 of the Metropolitan Correctional Center manual allows for the use of civilian clothes while involved in court proceedings for pretrial. Again, however, Yahweh Ben Yahweh and his followers were not allowed to wear their cultural attire in the courtroom. Calls to Yahweh Ben Yahweh's lawyer were routinely denied. When Yahweh Ben Yahweh was allowed to talk to his legal counsel, the phone was constantly taken away in the midst of their conversation, which contradicts the fact that the warden may not apply frequency limitations on the inmate telephone calls to attorneys. Yahweh Ben Yahweh was kept in a lockdown hole, while the public had been told he was in segregation, reserved for problem inmates. Yahweh Ben Yahweh hadn't committed nor been convicted of a crime, nor was there any record of him causing any problems since being detained. Yahweh Ben Yahweh was repeatedly denied the freedom of the press. He was abused by officers, causing him to be sent to medical, all on top of being denied bond. The prosecution, which had the legal obligation to report all evidence and witnesses, had been given permission to withhold this vital information. Additionally, the judge limited the defense to 30 days to prepare for trial, although the prosecution had been preparing for 4.5 years. The judge was recorded specifically saying that he was not concerned about an impartial jury. The judge refused to acknowledge the defendants by their religiously adopted names, although some had previously legally changed their names. The judge refused to allocate adequate funds for the investigation requirements of the defendants, although millions of dollars were spent by the prosecution. The judge showed an open disregard for the religious beliefs of the defendants, even scheduling the trial to occur in the midst of one of the 3 most sacred holy festivals of the defendants, as well as scheduling a trial at a time when 4 of the defense lawyers couldn't fully participate. The judge allowed the prosecution to have a free hand in all affairs and urged the defendants to plead guilty at any time, saying, "I prefer to get it out of the way in a hurry." He followed this statement by expounding on his sentencing guidelines, never once giving consideration to the fact that the defendants may be innocent. After an arduous trial on the federal level, Yahweh Ben Yahweh was convicted of conspiracy to murder. When handing down the sentence to Yahweh, Judge Roediger stunned prosecution attorneys, jury members, and the press by complimenting Yahweh on attempting to be a good community influence. He then reduced Yahweh's sentence to 18 years, with possibility of parole in 9 years. To make things worse, Yahweh ben Yahweh requested that he be released on parole, this time on an emergency basis to join his ailing father. The government opposed the release because it felt that he was still a threat to the community. After Yahweh ben Yahweh's father passed away, the parole commission denied the request, in part because the emergency had subsided, and in part because an immediate release does not provide time for release planning. Upon being released from prison on parole in 2001, he returned to Miami. However, all of his activities were restricted until a few months before his death. He was prohibited from reconnecting with his congregation. He was restricted from any form of speech by internet, telephone, computer, radio, or television that could place him in contact with any Nation of Yahweh members. Some common misconceptions about the Nation of Yahweh. The Nation of Yahweh is a racist cult claiming that white people are devils. This is absolutely false, and there's no evidence to support this. Yahweh ben Yahweh exercised his right to hold opinions without interference and the right to freedom of expression. A devil is anyone who is a wicked person. Isn't the Nation of Yahweh a terrorist organization involved in various criminal activities? This is also not true. Yahweh ben Yahweh and his followers created an oasis in an otherwise downtrodden and drug-infested city. Didn't Yahweh ben Yahweh order beheadings? No, never. This stems from a speech that was taken completely out of context by the media. Still to this day, there has never been a single person found decapitated, nor were their heads turning up all around Miami. As Yahweh ben Yahweh jokingly commented in a 1980s interview, if the millions of men and women within the Nation of Yahweh were required to cut off the head of a white person, there wouldn't be any left. There is an audio on which Yahweh ben Yahweh states that while he was in court, the judge asked him if he was indeed ordering the beheading of white people. To the shock of the courtroom, he replied, "Yes, Judge." He continued to say that he asked one of his followers to bring him the head of a white person, and in the bag, he was given a pack of cigarettes, a bottle of alcohol, and a bag of white sugar. To cut off their heads was an analogy that all members of the Nation of Yahweh understood, a metaphor in which Yahweh ben Yahweh taught to cease from using the products that were destroying our people. Whether it's Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the gentrification of historical black communities, the United States of America has historically been adverse to the developments of black communities in general. Modern error. In modern day, African Americans seem more lost than ever when it comes to cultural, historical, and spiritual identity. Black leaders of the past seem far removed and distant to many modern-day African Americans. However, the Nation of Yahweh, Hebrew Israelite consciousness as a cultural movement has slowly been garnering more mainstream attention. It is also becoming more and more present within society, especially seen in hip-hop. To be continued.